Generally, with the special operations crowd, I do if I have a guest on from that community, it's a life story, and there's so much truth that comes out of those interviews, and it's almost turned into like a therapy session.
Yeah, that's the confession.
I have somebody coming on who had to, maybe didn't even have to. I told him I didn't want to have the entire conversation on the phone, and that if he wanted to have it here, then we could have it here. And he says he does, but he killed a child. Mm-hmm. And it's stuck with him for years. Mm-hmm. It's haunted him. How do you make that right? How do you make something like that right?
I would say in a situation like that, the devil's in the details, right? So if I was working with someone like that, the first thing I would find out is, well, what happened? Mm-hmm. Because you need to know the details.
One day I'm in there, they spin up, and I'm like, fuck, of course, you know. The day I decided to get out, you know, and I missed the hostage rescue, you know. So I'm in there, but because of some different circumstances, you know, there was no clue that there was going to be anything, and we had guys doing some different kind of cool training stuff they had to get done. A lot of the recce guys and planners for, you know, when we have that, we're typically the guys that plan, you know, routes and jumps and different things like that, right? So I had had a platoon chief that, you know, like not everybody liked, but I had some kind of connection with him. I thought he was a really intelligent dude. I think his intelligence was underrated. And so I was like, hey, I'm gonna head out and go for a run around my neighborhood. I'm kind of also like depressed because I don't get to go do this thing, you know? He's like, okay. So I go running, get done running, get back to my house, look at my phone. There's a bunch of texts from him. I'm like, oh shit. So I call him, hey, what's going on? He's like, hey, we got some guys in different places trying to get back, but we could really use, you know, some planning help if you want to help plan this thing. I was like, yeah. And then just kind of joking around, you know, I'm like, hey, if I plan it, do I get to go? I'm on terminal leave. Of course I don't get to go, you know? Yeah, but he goes, hey, yeah, hold on a second. So he puts the phone down for a second, couple minutes, comes back. He's like, yeah, you can go. I'm like, holy shit. All right, how long do I have to get there? You got all your shit ready? Yeah. You probably better get here in like 45 minutes, you know, if you're gonna make this bird. So I'm like, oh shit. So that's how much time I had to throw all my shit in the truck and tell my wife, hey, I'm gonna go do this thing. Are you okay with it? She's like, holy shit, we got through all of this. And yeah, I'm not gonna stop you from doing this one thing, but it's kind of that whole like Team America thing, like just don't die. You know, so I'm like, okay, I won't, you know. Try my best and love you. You know, and squeeze the boys and go. And so now that's how I ended up on the mission. So,
you know, because, for example, in the story that you laid out, I don't know if that was, how much of that outcome could be attributed to the situation.
Well, let's just say it was a justified kill, but it still haunts him. I think it probably haunts a lot of the team members that were a part of that operation. But whether it was justified or not, he's still struggling with it.
Yeah.
He doesn't feel, I don't want to speak for the man, but it obviously bothers him because it got brought up right away. And he wants to bring that up here. And so,
well, what would I investigate then?
and you can find this in the news and shit. There was a hiccup with the staff for Obama informing him that we were in the air ready to jump when we got there. And so it got pushed 24 hours because he was asleep in Martha's Vineyard, from what I understand. I don't know the details of that. I know there's a bunch of shit that I probably have no fucking clue how it works, you know? And we come down, we push to the next night, and then we go. So I'm up there. I got a tandem medic on me, and I'm the point man for the op, you know? And I've got 3 other guys too. I'm usually a team of 4. And up in the point anyways. So everything goes well. We jump. Great landing. We get on this target. It's for, this is in the news too, 2 professors that were kidnapped from the University of Kabul days before. One was Australian, one was American. Kevin King and Timothy Weeks. And found out that they're here, right? Probably being moved around different compounds on their way to cross the border in Pakistan. And, you know, the network of dudes that do, you know, the most deviant shit with the Taliban, it's those guys, right? Suicide bombers, you know, just all the worst shit you can think of that happened, you know, chopping off heads and whatever other kind of shit. I think that honestly actually was more in Iraq, but I don't know. So it's those guys, right? And so we're expecting a hard fight, maybe. And we all know, if you have any experience with these guys in Afghanistan, with all the suicide bombs, the house-borne IEDs, all the shit we like go really deliberate with when we go to these compounds. We're looking for, I mean, it's slow CQB. We're looking at every threshold for wires, for different, you know, there's even started using, you know, motion sensors and, you know, light sensor, like photosensitive bulbs, you know, and pillows and shit like that to just blow, right? And there's so many ops where that happens, right? So it's high tension, and we're expecting this shit, and we get down, and they're at a compound, right? Got a long walk in, everything goes well, and then we get to, you know, we see some movement around, some guys that seem to have RPGs, motorcycles moving around, and then what I believe was going on based off of what happened was that was just normal shit going on, because we were able to get all the way up to the target, sneaking up and get up on top and get ready without anybody knowing anything, right? But there were a couple of noises, you know, that we made. The way that I go back to thinking about what actually happened on this op have a lot to do with, you know, Kevin King never spoke much about it after. Maybe he's super traumatized by it. Maybe he's living his life, whatever. But Timothy Weeks did speak up on it a bunch in a bunch of different interviews and news outlets. And, you know, I was in my contracting work after this op, and eventually they were cut a deal to be turned over and traded, and with the release of Anas Haqqani, which is, you know, the leader, and a couple of other guys. And once that happened, pretty quickly it went around, even in the news, like a little write-up that he had of like what he thought happened on those different ops, because there was a couple of failed attempts. And I pieced it together over time, what I thought really happened, right? And so different ROEs for a hostage rescue, totally different. And every operator really understands, like, pretty in depth, like what those are. You have to, right? You really talk about it. Because the mission is the hostages. And on a hostage rescue, it's so hard to talk about, especially with people that don't understand war and those things, because one of only a couple of things is going to happen. They're going to kill the hostages if they know that you're there, which has happened. And that's a really hard thing for operators to deal with after. And or you're going to rescue the hostages and kill all the bad guys. Great, you know? Or the good guys might accidentally kill the hostage while they're doing the operation. That's happened before too. That's hard. So as an operator, you go through your decision-making matrix to go, you're like, hey, my decision-making has to be very precise here, right? And this is where, even more so than any other time, or like there's no room for the soul, I think, in those. And that's a sacrifice that warriors have to make, in my opinion, to do what they do sometimes. And that's where the detachment from that is so hard afterwards to come back to, because you've just moments of detachment from that for so long over time, you know. And in history, some have been able to figure that, to stay attached and connected to that soul while they're doing it. But that just wasn't the case for where I was at, right? And what guys around me were at, and why it's so hard right now. Guys coming out. So we get up. I'm the first guy to touch the target. I climb up, sneak up to the roof, my spot. And my job is to protect the assaulters, right? And see what they can't see. So we have another team coming around on the other side, a little delayed because they went a different way. We weren't sure if we had been, compromised at all yet. My opinion is we still weren't. And so they climb up, they get set, they get ready, and in the meantime, I'm looking over down here, and there's 5 people sleeping in the courtyard. But we knew that. And on the way, trying to figure out who they are, what they are, making sure none of them are the hostages, right? And that there's a lot that goes into that identification, hair color, skin color, what do they look like? Is there any chance that they used to dress them up like in burqas, so that we'd think that they were women, right? So there wasn't any of that. They're all males. And through a process of that, getting to 100% clarity that like none of them are the hostages. But at the same time, going, hey, the ROE, the intel is saying that who these guys are and what networks they're part of. When they know we're here, they might blow up the whole fucking thing in themselves. They're willing to do that, right? And all of us. And we've experienced that before. Or they're gonna fucking spray something from under, from their little sleeping nest. And in my job, yeah, we're on a mission. The hostages are the most important. But if I hesitate in a decision, dude, I've gone through this so much shit. I'm gonna try my best here, because I went through a whole process for years of making sure I'm not justifying, but justifying, and like going back and forth with my ego, just trying to understand this thing. But also for so many years, I was just coping with it with addictions and drinking my face off and just being lost with that new trauma, right? And figuring out if the decision I made was the right one, because the decision I made was we're going to kill these 5 males, right? And eliminate any risk to those assaulters, because if one gets hit because I hesitated on that decision, then I know their wives. I know a bunch of them. I know, they're all around our community, and fuck, that's my job, right? So then I started to eventually separate this into a duty decision and a soul decision, right? So when the breach goes off, I'm eliminating those 5. So I did, right? Thinking back now, there were some things that happened outside there were some loud noises, some things, some mistakes that I think may have spooked those guys into stomping those hostages down into a tunnel system down below. Because when a couple of years later, when they got turned over, that reading the thing that he wrote was like, hey, the first time I woke up in the middle of the night and to getting kicked down a fucking hidden tunnel and was like knocked out and came back to. And then as soon as I came back to, there was a loud explosion, which is the breach, for one, I think. And so it wasn't like hours or days. It could have been seconds that we missed those guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not. So the breach goes off. The assaulters come in. They get into a fight with a couple of guys, eliminate them, and we're waiting to hear that got them. You know, in that room, the beds are still warm. There's still food from whenever before. You know, exercise bike, whatever. And hey, they're not here. And that's when essentially like, okay, we're going to clear this whole village now, which we did. And we've got other compounds we're looking at to, you know, to go look at, to go do. And as I'm doing my job, hopping from roof to roof, covering my guys, I'm going like this rush of just sort of stress comes over me because now it's soul time, right? This is what I didn't know. What I think I didn't know, I still go through this. To go, did I know? Did I not know? In that moment, that 2 out of the 5 males were kids. So, in the moment, it doesn't affect me too much. It's my job. You know, we wrap up that target, we get back, it's a failed hostage rescue. The team discusses like we always do. We go, hey, anybody have any issues with everything that went down tonight? Raise your hand. No. And even the guy who I told you, the platoon chief, was like, man, I brought it up because I didn't, you know, like, hey, I don't know. I think I know I did the right thing duty-wise, but something in here is fucking me up right now, right? And I'm good. He's like, you good? I'm good, but I don't know what to say. What I feel is like, hey, you did the right thing. With that, you know, when you breach in Afghanistan, it's a blind assault. There's fucking dust. It's like those guys' clearance was like you can't even see your hand in front of you. So imagine that, you know, hey, feeling your way into bad guys, you know, and making sure they're not the hostage. So that was that. The last I ever talked about it with anybody. The craziest thing was those guys got extended for a month to do more operations around this. Rangers get involved, other guys get involved, and like, all right, guys, I gotta go start my job in a fucking week and get back in time for it. So I fly back, and no shit, like 2 days later, I'm up in DC in this office at DITRA with a fucking suit and a tie, thinking about these kids and just trying to figure the shit out, but not understanding how. And I'm in this fucking office. I'm supposed to be getting read-ons and badges and shit, and I got there's this fucking, you know, guy who's the boss or whatever, the program manager, and he's like fucking eating Twinkies and shit all over his desk, and I'm like, hey, sir, what am I supposed to be? What do I need to do here? And he's like, fucking, what are you talking about? Get your ass over to the fucking brief you're supposed to be in. And I'm like, okay, you know, fucking dick, you know? And then I go do my best to figure out what the fuck I'm supposed to be doing in that job the first couple of weeks, you know? Just feeling lost, like, what the fuck am I, you know? And, you know, over time, I got into the swing of it, and it was actually a really good experience doing that work. It's just, you know, as I processed through this and went through this whole phase of just these years of just fucking figuring myself out, just getting the bullshit, shoveling the bullshit out as much as I could while still adding more, not being able to figure out why I couldn't get it off. And
so imagine he's torturing himself, and imagine he's doing that in a way that is counterproductive, and that's also counterproductive in relationship to his family. Is that helping or making it worse? right? I mean, so that's something to think about. This isn't, I mean, I'm speaking hypothetically because obviously I don't know this person. I don't know what their situation is, but almost everyone has other people depending on them. You know, and if you overburden yourself with guilt and take yourself out, you're going to hurt people around you. So you have a moral obligation to not do that if you can avoid it. So that's one of the things I would investigate to begin with. I would find out, well, exactly what happened. What were the situational requirements? Conscientious people tend to overestimate their culpability in any given situation and downplay the situational factors. And that's called the fundamental attribution error. And it's particularly true for conscientious people. So I do very careful analysis of the situation and find out, well, was it likely that anyone would have done that in that situation? Okay, well then there's another problem that comes along with that, which is, well, what does it mean about life that you can be in a situation where you have to do something terrible to proceed? That's a religious question to some degree. And there are ways of addressing that. In terms of atonement, likely what I would have him do is I would ask him, to begin with at least, is like, well, imagine that you were counseling one of your friends who has this problem, and you wanted to help him calculate a pathway forward that would enable him to get on with his life. What would you require from him? What sacrifice would you require for him? You know, because people will often burden themselves with an impossible moral task, and it's not helpful. It's not right to take yourself out of the game, right? So I can't be much more specific than that because the devil's always in the details. It has to be personalized.
To go back to that moment and now look at it instead of fucking hiding from it, which I was doing for years, and every time I wanted to think about it, I would just go fucking get drunk, you know? And I got to this point just a few years ago. I'm 8 years out now, and maybe 4 years ago was rock bottom, where this thing plus the childhood and all the shit I was doing outside of what I really wanted to be, right? Which was just good. I fucking, I had this friend in my neighborhood take his own life just in the little lake across from my front porch. And I used to go to that spot just because it made me feel good. I just would take a paddleboard over there, and I would just kind of lay there where he took his life and go, fuck, I feel something here. And then every time I leave this spot, I don't feel anything. And because of that, eventually I started to just about a year of this seed being planted and growing in my head to where man, I can just I'm a burden on everybody. I'm yelling at my kids. I'm a horrible husband. I'm addicted to everything. I can't figure this shit out with these kids. So, one day I found myself just playing slack sight squeeze. You know the drill when you're fucking dry firing, but with one in the tube. And then that was the moment. I'm like, what the? I didn't even really realize I was doing it. I was just thinking. And then I now think back to go, thank God I wasn't drinking a bunch there, because I think that in those moments, in that critical moment, which is the veteran suicide critical moment that I think about a lot, is a lot simpler than what I think we all think it is, because there's very specific thoughts going on in that moment, right? This guy, this couple of guys or my team thinks I'm a shitbag or something. I had another friend take his own life, and he was at that outstation with me, and he got sent home because he became a really bad alcoholic. Then he was a great operator before, and then he turned into this, and he started getting bounced around teams, but they got it to where he could survive through it, and he got to retire, and then right after he retired, he took his own life. And for him, it was a little different. It was dude, that whole bullshit of if a guy's not performing for whatever the reason is in that moment, when we start to jump on it and be like, that's a fucking dude's a shitbag, and you just betray him after everything, all the good he was in those hard moments. Like, that's the shit guys are thinking about, right? So there's a much better way to do that shit. And I even participated in some of it with a different guy we got rid of. It's like, we're hard motherfuckers, but we don't have to play that game when it gets to that. We can get rid of a dude for not performing or put him somewhere where he can get a little bit better, right? Take a break or whatever it is without going, he's going to and fucking jump on that and be like, shit, you know? Because once that label happens, that's a betrayal. And fast forward to later, that critical moment, those little memories like those are what they're thinking about, what we're thinking about, what I think.
One of the things that I've done with people who've had post-traumatic stress disorders, I've familiarized themselves with the literature of horror. That's very useful. So there's a book called Ordinary Men that details how a battalion of German police officers were turned into the murderers of naked pregnant women in Poland, one step at a time. There's a book called The Rape of Nanking, which is about what the Japanese did in China at the run-up to the Second World War. The woman who wrote that, Iris Chang, she committed suicide. It's a rough book. Human beings have a very dark side. And now and then, what happens to someone who's traumatized is they run into that dark side. Well, how would that be conceptualized religiously? Well, if you meet Satan at the crossroads, there's no necessity that you're going to recover from that. Like, these are realities. In fact, they're the deepest realities. That's why people break apart in a situation like that. They come across something that's so dark that they just can't function. Well, the first thing to become aware of is that's actually how the world is constituted. It's constituted as a landscape of good and evil. We're very bad at teaching people that. We portray it in our movies, always, in action-adventure stories, always a landscape of good and evil, a mythological quest, the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit, the Marvel universe. You know, those are all landscapes of good and evil. What we don't understand is that is the landscape. Now, partly we don't understand it because we're in pumpkin shells, right? It's like, you know, normal middle-class existence. There's not much good in it in the extreme sense. There's not much evil in it in the extreme sense. It's all middle of the road. But that's not life.
I appreciate the fact on people who think like that, because so many people just justify their wrongdoings in their head. They justify why they did it, and they look for reasons to convince themselves on why they're sinning. Why do you think why is it so hard for people to just admit wrong instead of justifying?
Well, so that's related to that question you had about pride. We like to be right. If I'm right and you're wrong, I don't have to change. And so that's pretty convenient for me, because change, there's a desert part of change. Like, if I have to change, I have to fall apart, and then I have to put myself back together. It's very annoying to fall apart. You know, if you're arguing with your wife and it turns out you're wrong, then you have to go figure out why you're wrong. God only knows why you're wrong. Like, maybe it's a deep wrong. Maybe it's a pattern. And you have to take, maybe 10% of you has to go, something like that. And that's a kind of death. It's really hard. And so people will insist that they're right so they don't have to change. Because change involves sacrifice. Change involves death. When you learn something new, the stupid part of you has to go. And it has to die. And that's actually painful. You might have put a lot of work into that stupid part of yourself, you know, and then you have to let it go. And then it's not like like I said, it's not like you're better as soon as you let it go. No, you're just lost on that front. Then you have to figure out what to do instead. In the religious orientation, what you try to do is you try to replace insisting that you're right with trying to find out how to be right. And that's the opposite of pride. That's humility. It's like, okay, there's some pathway forward here that I could journey down if I could only specify what it was.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, Share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.